hosted at afr.net and on the Focal Point Facebook page. You'll also find the best collection of Brian's resources on our Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, you can be among the first every morning to find out what the day's show will be about. Just follow Brian at Brian J. Fisher.
Welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Just want to close the loop on our conversation about immigration in that last hour. Going back to Teddy Roosevelt from a letter he wrote in 1919. This is a letter he wrote 95 years ago on the subject of immigration. We should insist that if the immigrant who comes here does in good faith become an American and assimilates himself to us, he shall be treated on an exact quality with everyone else. But this is predicated upon the man's becoming in very fact an American and nothing but an American. If he tries to keep segregated with men of his own origin, which is what Muslims do when they come to the United States, they segregate themselves into little Islamic havens that become no-go zones, even for police and emergency vehicles. If he tries to keep segregated with men of his own origin, now remember, I'm not saying that about 100% of Muslim immigrants, but that is the vast majority of them. That is the bulk of them. They congregate together, they segregate themselves, they form these little Islamic havens. If he tries to keep segregated with men of his own origin and separated from the rest of America, then he isn't doing his part as an American. There can be no divided allegiance here. Listen to this, Teddy Roosevelt, 1919, we have room for but one language here, and that is the English language. For we intend to see that the crucible, that is referring to America as this kind of refining pot, we intend to see that the crucible turns out our people as Americans of American nationality and not as dwellers in a polyglot boarding house. Polyglot's a word for speaking a whole bunch of languages. And we have room for but one soul loyalty, S-O-U-L, one soul loyalty, and that is loyalty to the American people. Let's grab another dust-up thing that popped up over the last couple of days is whether Jay Carney gets questions from the media in advance. Now, this is audio clip A7. This is a local reporter, got a chance to go to the White House, spend some time with Jay Carney, and she's reporting on what she observed. She is reporting on what she was told. Now, she's backed away from this. She got so much heat, I think, from the White House that she's changed her story. But here's what she said before the PC police got to her.
It was a very busy day. We started here shortly after 8 o'clock with a coffee with Press Secretary Jay Carney inside his office in the West Wing, and this was off the record, so we were able to ask him all about some of the preparation that he does on a regular basis for talking to the press in his daily press briefings. He showed us a very long list of items that he has to be well versed on every single day, and then he also mentioned that a lot of times, unless it's something breaking, the questions that the reporters actually asked, or the correspondents, they are provided to him in advance. So then he knows what he's going to be answering, and sometimes those correspondents and reporters also have those answers printed in front of them because, of course, it helps when they're producing their reports for later on.
All right, so this is a reporter saying, hey, Jay Carney told me this. Jay Carney told me we get the answers ahead of time. So we know what they're going to ask. We can tool up. We can prepare ourselves. We even give them pre-written responses to their own questions. So it's just a staged thing. These press conferences are just staged events. And Ed Henry, Fox News, saying, hey, that doesn't happen to me. Well, he's Fox News. He's going to be out of the loop. He's not going to be in on this deal. And he'd blow the whistle if they came to him and said, hey, if we're going to call on you, we want your questions ahead of time. They know that Ed Henry would blow the whistle. Now, here's Cheryl Atkinson, CBS, and she's the one that got fired by CBS because she was doing honest-to-goodness journalism. She was doing some of the best journalism that was done about Benghazi, and CBS canned her. She couldn't get her stories on the air. Her airtime got cut by about 2/3. She was only on air for about 53 minutes for all of 2013. Why? Because she could not get her editors to approve her stories. Why? Because they were good, decent, honest, objective journalism. And CBS basically was telling Cheryl Atkinson, look, you have forgot what our role is here. Our role is to polish the crown of King Barack the Lawless. That's our job. You're not getting the picture here about what your role. We're not here to be journalists. We're here to be a part of the press agency, the press arm, the press office of the Obama administration. Now, here's what Cheryl Atkinson said in response to this charge, that a lot of these questions are pre-scripted.
I wouldn't be surprised if sometimes there is that sort of level of cooperation with some questions that want to be asked. Like we will tell them, if I need something answered from the White House and they won't tell me, I'll call our White House correspondent. And they're familiar with the White House correspondents in general. So the White House correspondent may ask Jay Carney or one of his folks about an issue, and they will be told, ask that at the briefing and we'll answer it. In other words, they want to answer it in front of everybody. They do know it's coming and they'll call on you. I mean, there's that kind of a coordination sometimes. And I wouldn't be shocked if there's sometimes more coordination. I don't think it's everybody on every briefing every day. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not. But I think people would be surprised at the level of cooperation reporters have in general with politicians and not just this administration.
So Cheryl Atkinson basically saying, yeah, I mean, this reporter's exactly right. In fact, I was doing honest, objective journalism, so I got shut out of the White House. I couldn't get to them. So I had to go through our White House correspondent who was cozy with Jay Carney. The only way I could even get a question to them was I had to go through the White House correspondents. They were shutting me out because I wouldn't give them these pre-scripted questions. So I'd have to go to the White House correspondent. The White House correspondent goes to Jay Carney, says, hey, Cheryl Atkinson has this question. And so now he's alerted. He's got a heads up. He knows what's coming, so they can go back and decide how they're going to spin that thing. They got several hours now to decide how they're going to spin that question. So there's no real honest give and take here. And Cheryl Atkinson says, look, you would be surprised at the level of cooperation reporters have with politicians. Well, I'm not surprised. I don't know about you. This doesn't come as a surprise to me whatsoever, because we've known since day one that the media is completely in the hip pocket of the Obama administration. All right, let's go back to the phones. Let's grab a call from April in North Carolina. April, thanks for calling. Thanks for waiting. What's on your mind?
Hey, I've been thinking about the amnesty thing that y'all were talking about, and it seems to me that it's anathema to the Republican origins or the Republican beginnings, because they fought against slavery. And if you are reducing, getting cheap labor, so to speak, then aren't you not just undercutting the American worker, but you're undercutting these people. You're getting them over as in virtual slaves.
Well, and I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but you're not far off, because what they're doing is making it impossible for American workers to be rewarded for their labor in a way that is honest. I mean, so what you're saying, and I would go this far with you, they're making them work for slave wages. They're
right.
making them, so they cannot receive an honest day's pay for an honest day's work, because they're being robbed by workers who are receiving wages below what they would have to pay if they were paying them to American workers who have a legal right to live and work here. You got a lot of this under the table stuff. Construction industries, a lot of the jobs in construction industry have been taken over by those that don't even speak English. Chris was talking about that. He can't even get a job now in that field because he speaks English. And Teddy Roosevelt said, look, this is the only language that we ought to have in America. You come to America, we're going to expect you to learn English and to be able to speak in English, because that is our language. It is our one language. So, and I don't know. I mean, Chris is, in some ways, April, Chris is in a worse position than slaves, because at least slaves had a job. At least they got food. At least they got shelter. Chris doesn't even have a job. He's in a worse position in some ways than a slave was, because of the way that American business and the Republican Party has sold out to the big money people that want the cheap labor. Anything you want to add?
Well, I was just thinking that business is going to try to get the lowest dollar they can, but it's about the Republican Party. Their origins were against slavery.
Yes.
And what they are in essence doing, and yes, I'm not saying it's the exact same thing, but it's similar. And what they're doing is they're going against the very origins of how they started.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. And, you think about it, April. I mean, if the Republican Party came into being to fight slavery, they came into being to fight for the little guy. They came into being to fight for the little guy whose rights, whose unalienable rights to life and liberty, in his case, were being infringed. So that's why the GOP exists. It exists to fight for the little guy. Now, when the GOP does this, when they sell their souls to the devil, I'm using that as a figure of speech. Please understand me here. But they've made a bargain, a Faustian bargain with the devil. They've sold their souls for a mess of pottage. Then they are becoming the party of big business. They are just feeding the stereotype that the Republican Party is all about the corporate fat cats. They're just giving credence to that. It's largely a stereotype, but they're reinforcing that. And how do they expect to get the ordinary guy, the little guy, to vote for them when they look at the Republican Party as kind of cooperating with the effort that's costing them their jobs? All right, April, thank you for the call. Appreciate it. Let's go to Heather in Alabama. Heather, welcome to Focal Point. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Brian. I lived in that area of North Carolina where Renee Elmer's is supposed to be a representative.
Yes.
Let me just add a point to what you just said. Not only do they sell their souls, but they also lose their races when they do this. They also lose because the Republicans, the registered Republicans, they stay home. They get angry, they look at the Republicans, and they say, why would I want to vote for a Democrat light?
And Heather, I agree with you, and it's just, it's aggravating because it is so irrational what they're doing. It is so mindless.
And Brian, let me tell you, there is another gentleman, and I use that term loosely, who is running. He ran in 2012. He lost, and he's running again, and he's for Big Farm, and he's riding the coattails of Jesse Helms, and he's pushing for amnesty. And these were his words, where Americans do not want these jobs.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, Heather, I mean, that's just flat wrong. And I know that from my experience. I worked all these jobs that this guy is saying Americans won't do. I worked them. I worked in a tomato shed. That's agriculture. I worked picking grapes. That's agriculture. That's farm work. I worked in a raisin plant. That's farm work. That's agriculture. I worked in a slaughterhouse because I needed the work and they were willing to pay me to do it. Now, because of welfare, you can make more money staying home sitting on your can. So it's a multiple-sided problem. Thanks for the call, Heather. Back on Tuesday with us.